And now for today's topic, here's your host.
Thank you, Pete. We are welcoming you to this Friday afternoon edition of Breaking Free, and looking forward to an hour that I am probably going to learn as much or more than you are as a listener today, as we embark on a process of learning how landowners can be better stewards of your land, but find out just if you've got 40 acres of land or more, just what that means, what that could mean to you, and how you preserve that land and so forth. We are privileged to have Al Hersig in studio with us. And Al is one of the founders of Landowners Planning and Resource Group, LLC of Traverse City and Lapeer. And so we want to jump right into this. Alan, thank you for coming in, first of all.
Well, thank you, Brian. We appreciate the invitation.
Tell us about this partnership. Your partner is down in Lapeer. Is this Landowners Planning and Resource Group? Is it you and he together, joint ownership, or is this a larger picture nationwide?
We focus in Michigan, okay. And Bill and I are the principals and consultants. We have had a vision to provide landowners with the options and the opportunities to learn how to be good stewards, how to use their land for their future. And so we wanted to cover the state of Michigan. We had a passion to do this. We both have extensive experience with private landowners. I have 38 years on the public sector side with the federal government. Bill has 30 years in the private sector with land transfers and tax issues. And so we thought it was a great combination to bring both of those together and provide services to landowners that does not really exist anywhere. And so we have two offices here in Traverse City. I have the one, and Bill has one in Lapeer, but we do cover the whole state.
Okay. When it comes to really looking at this, is it 40 acres or more? That's pretty much what you have to have, or is some of the acreage is smaller than that?
Oh, we can look at smaller parcels. We've targeted 40 acres because many of the conservation programs and the tax incentive programs are based on 40 acres.
Okay.
That's the way the laws are written. However, in agriculture, particularly in this part of the state, we do know that fruit farms and specialty farms can be very viable at less than 40 acres. And so, we'll look at those as well. But we're looking to help landowners keep those larger parcels together. Okay. That's the risk when landowners don't plan for the future, that when they do pass, what's the next generation going to do in terms of dealing with the inheritance taxes, the loss of caps on property taxes, and next thing you know, those parcels get broken because the children don't want to be on the land. They want their part of the pie.
Sure.
And so it gets broken up, and it becomes very difficult then to manage those smaller parcels in a way that's good for the environment and good for the family as well.
Some of the information that you have here when it comes to looking at breaking that down, or some of the services or things that you help them consider, would be property tax exemptions, estate planning, development alternatives, conservation options, and state and federal programs. So all of those are kind of where you've got your eyes focused.
That's correct. We have basically three objectives that we try to bring to the landowners. We do look for those conservation and tax reducing programs that will benefit their land and the cost of land ownership. And that's just like a lot of segments of the economy. It's a spiraling upward process, and we need to help landowners hold those down. We really look to match programs to the landowner's needs, their desires, their wants, and what is the land capable of providing in terms of those needs. And then the last one is how do they preserve their land wealth? It costs money to own land. Land is very valuable and in many cases a diminishing commodity. How do they maintain that wealth but ensure their legacy? How do they get that to that next generation, particularly if it's their family? If it's working lands such as cropland or forest lands that they want to continue to manage, and the next generation wants to do that, how do they get there? So those 5 areas that you talked about are the areas that we focus on because those are the areas that landowners have the biggest questions and most of the concerns.
Okay. We're talking with Al Hersig again this afternoon from Landowners Planning and Resources Group, LLC in Traverse City. They're online at lprgllc.com. And you can find out more information there as well. Al, let's back up a little bit on the genesis of this organization, your organization, and how did you really become interested in the whole idea of looking at land as some critical assets for people?
As I said, Bill and I both have had numerous years of experience with private landowners, and I particularly have dealt with hundreds and thousands of landowners in the state of Michigan because of my previous experiences with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And managed most of the private lands programs, the incentive conservation programs for private landowners. Within that venue, it was very obvious to me that the financial concerns that landowners have with land ownership are really overwhelming in some cases, but they're very prominent, and it impacts what they do, what their decisions are as to how to manage their lands. And over the years, we found that if that financial concern is lessened or addressed and becomes more manageable, then most landowners want to be good land stewards. They want to be conservationists. They want to use their lands well because they know their gifts that they've received, just like any other gifts that God gives them. And so they can then move very easily into being the better land steward because they don't have the concern of the financial burden of land ownership. And so we looked at how do we do that? How do we remove that financial concern or lessen it and then elevate their stewardship? And then along with that, what we're finding is many landowners, the majority of landowners in Michigan are probably approaching the average age of 60. And so this concern about what happens to my lands that I've invested all my time and labor and resources on, what's going to happen to that? So they're really concerned about that now, and we're finding that's the primary question. And so we want to help landowners figure out how that next generation can get it, how they can afford to hang on to it and keep it going, or is there an organization that may take it under a conservation easement and continue the environmental and natural resources benefits that a larger tract of land can provide to society.
Okay. If you have questions in regard to our topic of discussion this afternoon, we'd love to entertain your question. The telephone number to call is 946-1400. 946-1400, and you can address your question to Al this afternoon. Throughout the program, we'll be here until 1 o'clock this afternoon. Well, Al, you've outlined the objectives, some of the objectives, I should say, and your mission there to protecting land into the future. Is there a point where even the landowner, is this something that every landowner is conscious of and aware of, or is it kind of a bring it to the forefront for people and they go, oh, yeah, I never thought about this?
I think they've thought about it, but they don't know how to approach it in many cases. And there are a variety of programs that help them with their current ownership. But I think it becomes difficult in trying to sit down with the families, and we've done this in a number of cases, and figure out what's the vision that the landowner has for the property. Do they want it to stay as a forest? Do they want to protect it because of its unique and sensitive sensitive environmental characteristics? Do they want to keep it as a farm? And so that requires the family as a unit to sit down and discuss it and come to some agreement. And that's not always something that is number one on their list of things to do. So they are concerned about it. There are so many tax implications and financial implications of not doing it. And people hear horror stories about what happens if they don't plan for the future. But it's also a little daunting and confusing as to how they get started and go about planning for that future. And that's really where we come in. We help hopefully remove some of the confusion and some of the fear by giving them some planning options, giving them some suggestions that they can use.
All right. When we come back from our first break here this afternoon, we're going to be talking about some of the property tax exemptions. Again, if you are a property owner, and we're talking more than a subdivision plot here, a downtown plot, but something of a little acreage and value to it. So we'll come back and talk about land use classifications and much more here this afternoon. Again, our topic of discussion this afternoon with Al Herzig from Landowners Planning and Resource Group, LLC. Very fascinating discussion on wise stewardship of what God has entrusted into your hands in your properties. And if you have acreage and you're thinking about, well, you know what, I'd love to do this or that, but I just don't know what the ramifications are financially, legally, and tax-wise. How do I pass maybe a fruit farm or farming acreage on to someone that would maybe not a family member, or a family member that someone that would help preserve that agricultural area? Whatever the case might be. Could be a marine area.
And now, with more of today's discussion topic on Breaking Free, here's your host.
Our guest this afternoon, Landowner and Planning and Resource Group, LLC, Al Herzig, is in studio with me this afternoon talking about preserving your land wealth, ensuring your legacy. Now, Al, as was going through the break there, a couple of things came to mind. And you kind of set me straight in my thinking. So I'll give you that right out before I start asking these questions. But I said, gave the disclaimer, I'm going to be learning probably as much or more than anybody else here this afternoon. When it comes to preserving your land wealth, I'm thinking of people that may have wetlands, you know, Ducks Unlimited or somebody that might be interested in something like that. You look at agribusiness, you look at woodlands, preserving that. You look at adjoining properties to state lands and how how that might be working out for people. Those people that might find themselves with several hundred acres adjoining city limit properties, and now we've got developments that are wanting to move out there. So are you dealing primarily with the preservation to maintain property where they have it, or are you looking at using that property as their greatest asset for possible retirement and that type of thing? So clarify my brains in this area.
Well, you're on the right track. Land ownership can either be an asset or a liability.
Sure.
And we try to make sure that we're on the asset side.
Okay.
Improperly managed or poorly managed lands will lose value. Forest land that's not properly managed, to the point where harvesting potentials are now 50 or 60 years down the road instead of 30 or 40, are not worth as much. Lands that get broken up into smaller pieces then almost get relegated to just residential development. Cropland in particular is a diminishing commodity, particularly here in this part of the state where we have so much fruit and vegetable and specialty crops because of the microclimates. Every acre that's lost removes that opportunity for future production. And we all know that the populations are continuing to expand. The demands for food continue to expand. And so we're losing production capabilities, whether it's food or fiber on one hand, and we have increasing populations. So it's a little bit of a collision course. So maintaining those lands in a quality state, keeping them in sizes that are manageable, that can be managed, increase in value. And you mentioned, ducks unlimited or wetlands. There are wetland preservation programs. And I've discovered over the years that when USDA places wetland conservation easements or other conservancies place wetland conservation easements on, those lands have a tendency to increase in value because people know that they're going to stay as a wetland.
Okay.
And so in many cases, landowners still retain ownership. But then the next potential landowner is focused on the particular use that land has been designated for, whether it's agriculture or forestry or wetlands. And those parcels are few and far between, and so they become more valuable. So we see that lands that are properly managed and have good conservation planning, good planning for future development in some cases, or lack thereof, do become more valuable.
Right. Well, I just wrote down here, getting ahead of the action. So really, I mean, with somebody with your expertise and the expertise of your company, what you're trying to do is get out in front of the process.
Exactly. We were recently at a meeting with forest landowners, and their number one concern, their number one question was, I've spent all this time and labor and love in managing my forests, getting them into a situation where they're sustainable. How do I get that transferred to my children so that they can afford to keep it? That's the big issue. People have done the stewardship. They've done the conservation. They've invested the time and the money. Now, how do they maintain that into the future? Whether it's still your future or your future of your children.
Yeah. Okay. Wetlands, let's talk about, well, you just mentioned wetlands. I'm thinking about agriculture, agribusinesses, and so forth. I'm coming from a farm out of Minnesota, 720 acres roughly, and so forth. You look at that and you say, well, we're working on making sure we've got healthy crops going on, and we're working on soil erosion and conservation there. And then all of a sudden, the kids seem to grow more quickly than you realize. And all of a sudden, the last one is on his way out of the house. And you realize, you know what? The family farm may not remain the family farm.
Right.
So where do we go?
Well, I think while people are still operating their farms, we'll talk about the wetland issue. Too many times they're considered a detriment. The farming policies don't allow them to be drained anymore. But we take a different approach, and we look at those, and we look for the programs that will provide either a tax incentive or an incentive payment back to the landowner for maintaining those wetlands. And so many times, instead of just getting income from the crop production or from timber production, now they're also getting income or tax reductions by maintaining those wetlands, because there's a big need to do that. We, from a total watershed standpoint, they're one of the most critical ecosystems that we have and must maintain in order to maintain water quality, both surface and groundwater. So they're the big filters and areas that have been created with a really great plan that our great creator did to maintain our water quality. And so the government and a lot of conservancies want to participate and help landowners do that. So once they do that, then if they don't have the next generation coming up, as you said, family members, there are some other programs that are out there to also help mentor a new generation of land operators. And so there are some ways to help that new person to get into agriculture. Agriculture is very, very capital intensive. Land is one of the big expenses along with equipment. But there are some ways to help bring new people in and make it affordable and make it tax benefit both to the landowner as well as the new operator. And so, we look for those opportunities for every parcel is different. Every parcel is unique and every landowner is unique. And so we look to make sure that gets matched up properly.
All right. Very good. The property tax exemptions, I mentioned those just a moment ago. You've got land use classifications, conservation program impacts. We talked briefly about that. Temporary easements, permanent easements, as well as the local conservation programs. What about the tax exemptions for land use classification?
Well, I think we look at just how is the land classified. If it's, a residential, or in Michigan, most cases it gets taxed in at what's considered the highest and best use. So that's the highest rate. But if it's really being operated and if it's in the proper sizes as a farm, or as forest land, or as recreational land, or maybe even under protection for wetland purposes or for endangered species, that changes the classification, that changes the tax structure, and it requires that the landowner do that with the local, township boards. So, and we just help verify that. And in some cases, it may be just a matter of a description or having a plan in place that says that you're managing for forest purposes, as opposed to just letting it go for the highest and best use classification.
So having someone like you come in, you'd be able to take a look, okay, I've got 40 acres of property. Here's where I'm classified right now. Do you know of any other way that we could classify this to lower my property tax rate?
Right.
Or the tax rate. Okay.
And then these other items, then, there are some conservation programs, as I said, if you're in those that require the landowner to maintain a certain land use, that could reduce the taxes because you're not at the highest and best use. Temporary easements are short-term easements that provide an immediate tax benefit. Permanent easements are just what they say. They go into for perpetuity's sake. Then that does restrict what the landowner can do, and so there are generally reductions in tax rates for that purpose. And then there are some local conservation programs that kind of give landowners an opportunity to test the waters, if you will.
Okay.
And it's a smaller benefit, but it gives them an opportunity to say, okay, if I keep it in agriculture and I get a little tax benefit, what does that feel like? And am I ready to go the next step and maybe do a bigger or more permanent easement? And we've worked with landowners. We've worked with one particularly in Leelanau County. The Conservancy has a program that does that, kind of eases people into a conservation easement, and they went to full progression and ended up with meeting the needs that they had charted for their the future of their farm.
I think about living wills and living trusts. I mean, this is kind of the living will and living trust of land, right?
Exactly. And that's, we're not lawyers. We don't do tax planning, estate planning, but we look at trying to help the landowner through that process. What's your vision? What do you want to have happen? Who do you want to have inherit your land? Maybe it's a conservation organization and not and an entity and not a family member. And then how do you get that transferred so that it is affordable, particularly for a family member? So we'll go through that. And many times estate planners don't understand the concepts of land and why it needs to stay in a certain land use for certain reasons. And so we help landowners communicate that with their estate planners.
Okay.
There may, in some cases, be portions or parcels that should be developed. And many times it provides a future home site. Maybe they do divide their property. It's large enough, but they want to make sure the children each have a place to have a home. And so, we'll look at making sure that those get reserved and help people understand why they need to do that within certain parameters of the various conservation easement laws. So, and it may be that there's a parcel that just is never going to really be anything other than developed. And they go ahead and sell that, generate some funds to help maintain the use of the other portion of their property.
Do you find, and I think you're kind of walking down this road already, but would you find, let's say we've got a 750-acre fruit farmer that's out here. Would you be able to find within that 750 acres that maybe they've got 50, 60 acres that should be classified as wetlands, and classify within that full 750 acres, you'd actually have sub-parceled out portions of land that might be under different tax exemptions and so forth?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we would look for those conservation programs that would help them put the management and the delineation and the description in place so that they can find those parcels. And as I said, instead of considering those non-productive portions of their farm, now all of a sudden they may be providing some income in terms of an incentive benefit as well as tax reductions. So it's important to look at each parcel because each parcel is made up uniquely and has different abilities and capabilities, and matching that with what the landowner wants to do is so important. If a landowner has forest land and is willing to allow the public to have access during hunting season, there's one program. If they want to protect that forest land, but they're not too interested in allowing public access, then there are different programs for that. So we would look to make sure that their issues, their needs and concerns are met, and that they just don't get pushed into a program that's not appropriate for them.
All right, very fascinating, and I think I'm trying to recall the scripture passage. I have Pete working on it for me this afternoon, but I'm sure this is part of the driving force behind your company being a Christian-based organization, and that is the Bible talks about managing your flocks and herds and lands and properties and making sure that you're aware of how you can optimize what God has entrusted to you.
Correct. And Bill and I both are committed to that. We have been from the very beginning. And all of our services, the bottom line is really to help maximize the land wealth and improve the stewardship of those natural resources. And it's kind of a shame at times when you hear stories about people that don't plan for the future, and then it goes through probate, and they end up giving their farm to the courts instead of to their family, and they may end up with only 40% of the value at the end of the day, and then they've lost the ability, if it's cropland, for future production as well, which is even a bigger price tag.
Sure. Thank you, Pete. Talking about being wise stewards of the property that God has given us, and we're talking specifically about acreages that are a little bit more than our postage size stamp properties in a city limits, or maybe even a 1 to 2 acre parcel that's in a subdivision. But acreages that have some value on it, acreages that have some return capability, whether it be wetlands or agricultural or whatever the case might be. Al Hersig is in the studio with us with Landowners Planning and Resources Group, LLC. And by the way, if you want to go on the website, you can do that. Their website, www.lprgllc. That's lprgllc.com. And you'll be able to go through some information there that'll be very helpful. Al, as we come back here from our break, we've talked about some of the properties, what the assets might be, but how is the landowner itself, as a landowner, how am I involved in this process that you help work me through?
Well, Brian, we don't do this for the landowner. We don't do it to the landowner. We do it with the landowner.
Okay.
And that's partly why landowner is in the name of the company. The landowner is the most important element in this equation. They're the decision makers, and so they have to be involved in the planning process. We can't just write a prescription for their land without the landowner being involved. So they're the landowners. It's their legacy, and it's their legacy that we want to help them to achieve. So as we said earlier, their land might be an asset or a liability. We hope that we can help with them shift it to the asset side. And so the biggest part of this is landowners defining what their goals are, what they want their land to do for them, or what they would like to see that land look like in the future. And so it requires then a fair amount of evaluation in terms of the needs and the capabilities of the land with the landowner's goals in mind. We can't do one without the other. This has to be something that the landowner's involved with, and so we spend a lot of time with the landowners. We may identify a lot of programs and options and planning options, but ultimately it's up to the landowner to make the decision. And one of the things that we've discovered over the years is that there's such a wide array of programs and planning options available that it becomes confusing. Sometimes information's in conflict with one another. And so we get the landowner involved so we can remove that confusion and that conflict so that they can understand, this is what I'd like to do. This is what I'd like to have happen. These are the options then that I can use or pursue to help me achieve that.
When you come into a situation, have you come into a situation where people end up having liability property and they didn't really recognize it or didn't realize it?
Yes. Yeah.
And how would you define that land that is a liability? Is it easy to define?
Well, I guess it would be land that has some capabilities, whether it's from a production standpoint, from agriculture or forestry, or maybe wildlife, that they're just paying taxes on, and they're not cultivating the opportunities to get an income return. It could be leasing the land. It may not be producing crops, but it may be producing wildlife, and it may be worthwhile for them to consider leasing that land for hunting purposes. It may be that they have some native species, and so there are some programs that would help give them an incentive to maintain native plant species to increase or support some of our natural pollinating insects. And, that's an issue and a concern in this part of the state because of all the fruit that we have. So there may be some things that they just don't recognize because they either didn't hear about a program or they were confused with competing interests that they may have received.
So if there's a potential landowner out there, I would think that, boy, there's a lot of homework that needs to be done on a piece of, let's say I'm looking at a 40-acre piece of parcel of property, and now I'm looking at buying it, but, it's just sitting there.
Right.
I should have my ducks in a row and really understand how is this an asset or a liability if I were to purchase.
Right. And it applies to if you're purchasing or if you already have it. We work primarily with landowners that already own so that they can retain ownership, afford to retain that ownership. But the process of planning applies in both situations. And that's what we do. We provide then a comprehensive report. And I think that's the key that our company has. We're not aware of anybody else in the state that's doing it from this perspective. And so we'll do a complete report for the landowner, and it becomes a full evaluation of the land and of their needs, and then it becomes customized. And we remove information that may be out there that does not apply. to the landowner's situation. And that doesn't happen very often. A lot of government programs are just advertised in mass media type approaches, and it doesn't always apply to everybody, and so it becomes very confusing. And you'll run across landowners that may have participated and had a very negative experience because it wasn't the right program for them. And so, we'll do that. We'll remove the stuff that's not pertinent to their situation, and we'll collect all that appropriate information from both the federal, the state, the local, nonprofit sources, and make those all available to the landowner, explore those alternatives. And that's what the landowner will have, is numerous alternatives and management strategies. We'll identify those potential property tax credits and development options and suggest that estate planning opportunities. And so we put that all together in one package. And many times it's 2 or 3 inches thick.
Oh, wow.
Because it contains all the contact information, where to go to get to the programs and to get to the opportunities that meet my concerns and my needs. It becomes their Bible.
Yeah.
Their Bible for their land and for their future and for their legacy.
All right. Well, ironically, you're coming into that position. We did get a caller that called in, left a question at the front desk, and they passed it to me. Listener calling in, what can a person expect to pay for an assessment service such as this that you're talking about? Is it kind of, I would say that it has to go with acreage and property and all that's developed into it, I would think, huh?
Yeah, we'll do this for any of the listeners today, is we'll do a free initial consultation, and we do need to look at the individual situation. It's not always just, as I've been saying, not a cookie cutter approach. It's customized and it's done uniquely for each site. And depending on what their goals and needs are, then we'll look at it and make them a proposal to help them achieve their goals. If they are really at square one, and this will be the full report. They've not been involved in a lot of programming from a conservation or land management standpoint. That will be a $2,500 plus expenses fee that we'll charge. But we continue to work with the landowner through that whole process, and it may take a number of months for landowners to go through all those decisions. And then we can go from there and help them implement this plan. And I think that's the other key. Having a plan sitting on a shelf doesn't do
anybody
any good, or the land. And so our goal is to make sure with this customized, tailored plan that we help you get it implemented.
Sure. And I think for me at least, and again, like I said at the beginning of the program, the educational process that I would think that you could bring to that landowner to probably educate me as a landowner as to the multiplicity of areas that I need to be looking at. Like I said, a breakdown of different plots within that acreage, even that could be segmented out as different classifications and all that comes in with that process. So I would think that you'd almost get a certification once you're done with this process. they feel like they're fully certified in understanding what potential their land has. We've got to take our final break here of the program and be back for the closing of our broadcast today. Again, if you want to get a question in yet this afternoon, another caller, you can give a call at 946-1400, 946-1400. By the way, the telephone number to call and get in touch with Al, your number is 517-281-9346. Is that correct, Al?
Yes.
All right, 517-281-9346 if you'd like to call Al, find out more about how you might be able to be connected with. Wrapping up our discussion this afternoon with Al Hersick, who is with the Landowners Planning Resource Group, LLC. So their website, again, is lprgllc.com, and the phone number to call, 517-281-9346. Picking up interest from our listeners this afternoon, some contacts on the phone that people asking about what specific program, how the specific program comes together for them. So what are, as we kind of personalize this for somebody that might be interested in this, how does this all come together for someone?
Well, Brian, I think that's something I do want to highlight. This is a personalized service for the landowners. The name of the company is Landowners Planning and Resource Group, and we personally help them plan and we help them find the resources that they need. And so, we're going to look at their situation and how we can help them to increase the value of their land. That's so key. Landowners need to know how to save money as well as time, particularly if they're in a working land situation, agriculture and timber. Time is very, very important, but so is being able to save money. But I think one of the real keys is for any landowner is sort of a peace of mind.
Sure.
That they know that they've received all the information that's available and that they have the information to make the best decisions possible concerning the stewardship of their land in the future of that. So I think that's really, really key. It becomes a personalized thing with the landowner.
Sure.
That doesn't happen very often. And you can just listen to all the input that comes of what might be available and what's out there and get confused or be conflicted with what some of that's all telling you is possible, but we're going to help you get that peace of mind. So at the end of the day, I have all the information I need and I'm making the best decisions.
Okay.
We also will work with the other professionals that a landowner may have, their financial planners, their estate planners, their tax preparers, other government agencies and nonprofit organizations. We help communicate the landowner's needs and wishes and desires to those various groups and help those professionals, because we don't do that work.
Right.
We get them in contact. We make sure that the other professionals providing services to the landowner understand what the land means to the landowner and what their goals and desires are. And then, as I said earlier, then we're going to stay with the landowner, stay in touch with them to help them get it implemented. If they need to apply for a particular practice or a program, we'll help them do that. We'll help them go through, the government red tape,
Sure.
And all the process that it takes to get to the program that meets their needs.
Okay. Well, you've got a website. We mentioned it before, www.lprgllc.com, and you've got kind of a special testimony on there that's taking place right here in our own backyard.
That's correct, Brian. And we do have testimonies on the website and additional information, but we also have a link to a story about a farming family in Leelanau County. It was in the Michigan Farmer magazine. That's the premier magazine in Michigan for agriculture. It was in the May 14th issue. It was the cover story and then the lead story in there about how this family went through the process that we're just talking about, and how we assisted them and helped them get through some program application issues, some visioning issues for the future of their farm, deciding, just how the children of that family were going to be involved, and how we helped them define the future of that farm. And then they got it enrolled into a conservation easement that will then ensure that their goals and their desires are being met. So it's a really very good story about a very classic situation, particularly here in Northwest Michigan.
And that's a great website to get that information. Again, the lprgllc.com. And as you are listening here, we're closing out the program today. We're going to make this program available, by the way, from today's broadcast on CD. And if you'd like to pass this along, I would think that, Al, anybody that has family members anywhere in the state that has 15, 20 acres, 40 acres or more that has the potential of being productive in some way, shape, or fashion, would want a copy of this program to get the awareness out there, at least that this kind of a service is available.
That's true, Brian, and that's why we're so appreciative of the invitation today, because it is an awareness, it is an educational process, and up until now, there haven't been a lot of avenues for people to pursue to get through this process. The understanding that I may need to do something with my land someday, but if people wait until they're 103 to make those decisions, they may have waited just a little too long. And so we're hoping that the information and the opportunities that they have to do the planning today for the future to ensure that legacy gets out.
Okay. And you're offering something special, I see, here at the table as well for the listeners that are listening today. They're tuned into the program, and you'd like to offer them something as well.
We'll do a free initial consultation, and they can call in or go to our website and request some service and just mention WLJN, and we'll go through and contact those individuals, and we'll do that initial consultation for them for free. We won't charge anybody until we have a chance to understand what they want to do and make sure that we can provide a service, that we can be of help and benefit to them. And then we'll give them a proposal.
All right. Very good. Al Herzig with us this afternoon on the Landowner Planning and Resource Group, LLC in Traverse City. And we encourage you, again, they're actually statewide. So if you have someone that you would like to get a copy of today's program to, make sure to contact us, and we'll set that CD aside for you. 946-1400 is the telephone number to call here. If you